Hello, hello, hello. It's Nikki Mantan. I feel like I gave a party and nobody came. Yeah. Um, Welcome to our final set tonight. This is was supposed to be a duo, but it's just me. So guess what? You get to listen to me. I will say that if I've learned anything over the course of the last 2 and 3/4 years, it's what I learned from my friend, mentor, teacher, and coach, Liz Allen, that you can improvise heartfelt monologues with impunity. And that's what I'm going to do for you tonight. I probably won't be improvising for half an hour, but I'm going to invite anyone that would like to um, participate in something similar to what I'm about to do, to reach out to me, Mickey at vintageimprov.org, and we can find some time on our shows to let you do this. As we get older, and even if we're not so old, more and more people in our lives start falling by the wayside, meaning they die. And that's not exactly what you'd think of as something funny or something happy necessarily. But there is something in the passing of people that we can celebrate and laugh some about, perhaps, that's also heartfelt. And that's what I want to do tonight. And I'd like to have a now and again segment and offer that to anyone that wants to pay tribute in an improvised way through an improvised monologue, probably with a suggestion that would be a place to center it around. But basically, it would be about the person that you want to have tribute for. So tonight, I'm just going to talk to you about someone that died the other night. Her name's Betty Bedford. And Betty was the stepmother of my sons, Nicholas and Xander and Jeremy, but Jeremy was already out of the house when that happened. But Nick and Xander, I think, were around 10 and 12 when they met her. My ex-husband, Robert, and I had a very interesting relationship. I think when I met him, I was very naive and a lot younger than him. And I thought what he told me could probably work. And it turns out it's not very realistic. If you're going to be in a relationship with someone over a long period of time, you should probably both love each other. And I loved him as a human being because he was a really kind, gentle soul. I thought he'd be a good father for my son, Jeremy, but I wasn't really in love with him. And that probably wasn't very fair to him. And we were married for 17 years. And then we got divorced. And I think he was pretty unhappy because Nick and Xander were young and he moved out of the house, thinking I gifted him the dog because he really loved the dog and he was by himself. But he was pretty lonely. After the divorce, through Match.com, he met Miss Betty. So Robert was 17 years older than me. Betty's a few years older than him. So we probably had a 20-year difference in our age. And that means we're in a different generation. I have to say, I don't understand how Robert, who I'm going to tell you I thought was a really beautiful human being, was the material that, as my boys called her, Miss Betty, would find in a significant other. But they were together longer than Robert and I were married. And I think they loved each other. And they were committed to each other in a way that I don't feel like I could ever have been committed to Robert. And I am so happy that he had the opportunity to be with her and be happy and feel loved. Miss Betty was a character. I mean, in a very, very good sense of the word. Now, I just spent time around her. I didn't really spend a lot of time speaking to her directly about her personal life history. So what you're going to hear me tell you is actually based on what my kids told me about her, and maybe a little bit of what I heard Robert say to my kids about her. But I suspect that there's some truth to it. And even if there's not, it's how I see her. So you're just going to hear it anyway. Robert was a pretty smart guy. He retired from the Army as the highest level of sergeant that you could be. And he had enough moxie to be able to get his PhD in the Army. But the day he retired, he retired. He basically never moved himself forward in any way after that. He was all about taking it easy and, as he said, quote unquote, getting his bennies. So Betty was, I think, came from the stock of, I believe, Naval Academy father, maybe grandfather, and husband. And so she was married to this officer, and the way my boys described it to me, they were stationed in the Far East, like maybe Hong Kong and places like that. He had a pretty high rank. And essentially, it sounds like, by what they tell me, she was like almost a diplomat's wife. And back in that day, I think they had like a lot of big parties, and she was probably, being the person that was the hostess. And she was a consummate hostess. I mean, consummate. She was so well educated and so verbally adept. And what I noticed was how she actually was able to put those skills to use in a very deft manner. For example, when Obama was running for office, my mother came for Nick's graduation dinner at the house. So it was a whole family, including Betty and Robert. And we're sitting there eating, and I think the politics of Betty and my mom were very different, but Betty didn't really like talk about politics as her primary thing, but she didn't mind bringing it out in people if she was playing the hostess. So I think my mother said something about Obama that was kind of negative, and then Betty probed him. And my sons remember something different than what I remember. But what I remember my mom saying was that she'd heard in her church that Obama was the Antichrist. I'm going, that's like from Revelations. Like that's kind of weird, like where'd that come from? And Betty picked up on that, and she just played my mother and drew out from her the most ridiculous diatribe. And we're all sitting with our mouths open, like, oh my God, how far is she going to go? And all she did was she'd ask a question, and she'd sit back and she'd just watch what happened. She just instigated it. And then everyone else around the table was talking, arguing, whatever, but there was definitely an interaction going on. And afterwards I thought, I mean, she knew what she was doing, right? She knew that she didn't have to say a lot, that she just had to set things in motion, and she could sit back. And I think she really, really enjoyed that role. So I'm imagining that probably in the years when she did her hostess thing, she had the opportunities to do something similar. And I love that, because I think, like, if she's 20 years older than me, that and they met in 1990, that in 1970 it was probably coming, like the time before is when she was doing the hostessing. And I think that was not such a great time for women. So she had a lot of power, and she was very smart, very, very smart. She Robert was not a good dresser. In fact, I got a kick out of it one time. I got him some clothes because I didn't like to see what he picked out for himself, and he gave me a rough time. He told me I had no taste and that he was going to wear whatever it was, some trashy something that he had. And he gave me lip about it. And I just was like, that's it, dude. I am not buying you any more clothes. You don't, I got stuff to do. I am not going to do this. And I just didn't fight with him anymore about it. Well, Nick and Xander used to be like in chorus and in the orchestra. And Robert and Betty would always go to the performances, and sometimes we went together. One time we were all gathered over at their house, and this I'm sure happened more than once, but this one I actually saw. It was around Christmas time, and I think she had an outfit that she meant for Robert to wear, and she probably told him, this is what he needed to wear, but he, in his infinite clothes horse wisdom, was like, no, I'm not going to wear that. I'm going to wear what I want to wear. And so he came out, we're all dressed. My boys are dressed in their like little tux thingies, and we're dressed up, and he comes out in some warped out, like thing that looked like it came from Paul Bunyan. And he just was like, and that's what he would do, here I am. And Betty just looked at him. He put his head down. He didn't say a word. He put his head down, and he walked back to the bedroom, and he changed his clothes and came out. And then she smiled at him, and we were good to go. I think one of the things that I loved immensely of her kindness and her wit, but kindness in particular, because Fran, who has been with us and my family since 1991, had an illness where she needed to have surgery and chemotherapy. And we weren't living in the area where the surgeon was. And Betty and Robert took her into their house. I think it was almost 6 months. It wasn't a question. It wasn't like, maybe if it fits into our lives. It was simply, you're going to come and be with us. And I feel like what happened was like magical. It made me see Betty and Robert a little bit differently, because while they had the capacity to be humane and kind in a magnanimous way, I never would have known it if it hadn't been for the fact that they just wholeheartedly embraced and cared for and accepted Fran in that time with her. And I am just eternally grateful to them. I wish that I'd known her better. I wished I'd known her when she was younger. I wish I could have been a little bird in a cage, watching what was going on when she was living in the Far East and doing the things where I'm sure she was in her glory. I think the world is a better place because Betty was in it. I know my family is in a better place because Betty was in it. And I'm really, really thankful that random things happen in people's lives, like Match.com, that bring people together that might otherwise never have met, brings an undeserving person like Robert. And when I say undeserving, I just mean she was so classy and he was just. And they came together and they had a great relationship and wonderful years together. And because of that, I think my boys have a much better relationship with their dad during the time that he had in this earth. And I really, really mourn, even though I'm smiling here and I'm telling some things that are funny, I mourn her loss and my condolences to her family. My condolences to my sons, because like I said, they loved her as the partner of their dad for the time, more time in their life than they knew he and I together. So this is a tribute tonight to Betty Bedford. God rest your soul. That's all for tonight, guys. We'll see you next week. Timeless will be back. The house teams, one way or another. And it was really great to spend this last little time with you, telling you about my son's stepmom, Betty Bedford. Bye bye.